Shalom and welcome to Reaching Higher, a podcast designed for Jewish children where we embark on exciting journeys through interesting and enjoyable subjects. I'm your host, Atara, and together, let's jump in to the wonders that await us. Welcome to Reaching Higher. Today's episode is called Kids in the Kitchen with Susie Fishbein because that's right, we're going to talk to Susie Fishbein herself about, you guessed it, kids in the kitchen. Susie is a really famous cookbook author and wrote all her cookbooks when she was a mom feeding her growing family. This episode is a special one. We're so glad you're here. Let's begin. Hi, Susie. Thank you so much for coming on Reaching Higher. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from and where you live now.
Sure. I am Susie Fishbein. I am the author of the Kosher by Design cookbook series. There's 9 books in that series, and they've been around for quite some time. I started doing this about 22 years ago, and I live in Livingston, New Jersey. And every single recipe that was ever developed, which is now well over 1,000 for these books, was done in my little home kitchen.
Okay, so I know you're a cookbook author because I grew up on your cookbooks, and I can't say I have all of them because I didn't even know there were 9 of them, but I definitely have a set of 4 or 5 of them. So I have to say my favorite recipe is definitely the potato kugel from the Kosher by Design. I know that it's on page 217. And if you open the cookbook on my shelf, it opens automatically to that page. And my son just started. I tried to get him, my oldest, who's 11, involved in the kitchen. He said, where do I find that potato kugel? That's what I want to make for Shabbos. I said, 217. He said, how do you know that? I said, I just know that because we make it. Don't we make it like every Shabbos? So tell us a little bit about your background, Susie. How did you get started writing cookbooks? Did you always like cooking as a child?
So I am self-taught as a cook, and I really did learn that later on in my life. But as a child, I used to like making things pretty. My father always in particular had a great appreciation for that. I remember going to the library and getting a book out of how to make vegetables into a floral arrangement. And I'll never forget what a good sport my mom was when 10 days after I made a chrysanthemum out of an onion, and it was stinking up my entire dining room, my mom still let it sit there till I was ready to let it go from all my hard work. So definitely like pretty, but not really cooking to feed anyone or really entertain. That's something I learned later in my life. I actually, like you, Atara, I was a public school teacher, actually, a 4th grade teacher. I had a master's in science, and I specialized in science education. And then I stopped when I was about to start raising my family, and then just sort of got involved in a cookbook project as a volunteer and fell in love with it, and was just in the right place in the right time in the kosher world where suddenly so many ingredients were becoming kosher and available. And I got just incredible opportunities to get started. And the first book was such a success. It led to the second, which led to the third, and it just kept going from there.
So you said, Susie, you were a science teacher. Do you view cooking as a science or more of an art?
So baking for sure is a science, but I think that's why I tend more towards cooking, which is much more freeing. There's almost nothing that it can be messed up, short of really completely burning a dish. There's almost nothing that can really be messed up when you're cooking, and I really love that freedom. Definitely my skills as a teacher come into play because in addition to writing these books, for the past 20 years, I've been giving live cooking classes. I go in front of audiences all over the world, and I teach cooking, including if our audience is kids, they might know like the Epcot International Food and Wine Festival at Disney. So it's almost always Jewish audiences, but not always. And that's always kind of interesting to me. When people ask me questions about like what is kosher or about certain, dishes that they, are known as kosher. And I also teach, in other countries, like I lead culinary tours. I have one coming up actually to Israel, which I'm excited about for the beginning of September, and 2 coming up to Florence, Italy. So this really, small volunteer job that started from really just volunteering to do a chesed ended up opening up a whole world of a life to me that I never would have known otherwise.
Wow. So Getting back to the kosher cookbooks, you said, and then we'll get back to all about your culinary travels. But you said that you wrote 9 cookbooks. When you started writing those cookbooks, were there a lot of kosher cookbooks available and you were inspired by those cookbooks, or was this really start? I know a lot more have entered the scene in the last 20 years.
Okay, so this is going to be very hard for your audience to relate to, but when I started writing these books, there was almost no internet. There was no Google. There was nothing like that. And there were no beautifully color, fully photographed, where like you could see what the food was supposed to look like and it jumped off the page. There was nothing like that. There were traditional Jewish cookbooks and they were wonderful, but they were not what I was looking to eat or cook or make for my friends and family. So what I was really looking to do was something that was starting in the not kosher world, which was beautiful, modern, elegant cookbooks that had beautiful photographs.
When you're trying to write a new cookbook and come up with the recipes, what inspires you? How do you decide that you're going to start a new recipe? Is that you think something is lacking and you want to make a new recipe, or you taste something in a restaurant, you want to try to copy it? How does that begin when you want to write a new recipe?
I would say that the stage that I was in my life is what inspired the book that I worked on. For example, the Kids in the Kitchen book that you said you grew up with. I wrote that book. Right now, thank God I have 4 children, but at the time I had 3 kids and I needed to cook for them and with them. And I wanted to give them activities to do with their friends. And I was constantly thinking about food for kids, recipes that didn't use a ton of appliances or, difficult to use equipment. So that stage in my life was exactly the right stage to be writing Kids in the Kitchen because that's what I was living. And as those kids grew, and then I added my son to the mix and I started having teenagers, that's when Kosher by Design teens and 20
somethings. I remember
exactly.
That one.
So I had my teenage son who loved to cook and, and cook for his friends, and my girls who were going off to college who needed to cook for themselves. And so a very organic place. So I think that has been part of the success of the series is unbelievable because it's all real. It all was, the Kosher by Design brings it home, which was the culmination of all my travels, was bringing home spices and palettes and techniques and recipes that I learned when I started doing international cooking classes and working with international chefs and seeing what kind of ingredients were in different kitchens in different countries. I could never have written that book as my first book. I didn't have that experience. I didn't have that knowledge. So the books definitely wrote themselves based on where I was in my life. Short on time. I was a very short on time mom. I had little kids. I was traveling for work. I needed to get dinner on the table. That book was absolutely my life in that moment. So that's sort of, the authenticity is what sold these books because it really was truly right. I didn't have a team of people working with me. It was me.
I love that because it feels so real. It's like whatever stage you were in at the time, that's what you wrote about. And then you moved on to the different stage and that's what you wrote about. And it was so real, which makes it amazing for the people that are reading your cookbooks because they know it's so authentic and it really is the solution for whatever problem they're looking for.
I look at that rainbow of spine and I totally see my family's history, which is really fun.
That is amazing. So as we said, you've been doing this for a while. Have you seen that the type of food and recipes have changed over the last years or through these years?
Oh, absolutely. The kosher food scene has exploded. Everybody has now been to, a kosher restaurant that's not just a pizza or falafel, stand. There are so many nice restaurants that use interesting ingredients and techniques. There are kosher magazines, actually for kids and for adults. You walk up and down, even in Livingston, New Jersey, where I live, it's just a ShopRite, which is not a kosher supermarket. There's a kosher aisle that has amazing ingredients. So it's become so easy to explore, new palette and new kinds of foods because of what's become available to the kosher consumer.
I think it's hard for our audience to understand what you mentioned at the beginning that, you were starting your cookbooks in the beginning before the time of Google and before the time of the internet and just searching up a recipe. When I want something, I just go on Google if I don't know where to find it in one of my cookbooks. But at the same time, like there's so many more kosher products available now. So recipe developing is probably completely different.
And kids are so much savvier. They've seen such cool foods, like especially if you're, some of your audience, I'm sure, is in Israel. There's an unbelievable food scene in Israel where there's everything available, and every, new person that makes Aliyah, that joins the food scene, enriches it in some way, whether it's the French with what, the baked goods that they've contributed, certainly the Moroccan food from Israel sings. And, every new person that arrives with their family's history of recipes and what they think food should look and taste and smell like. And then they share that with their neighbors, or if they're professional, with a wider audience. And kids are exposed to so much of that, and they're so savvy in food now.
Wow, there really are a lot of changes all the years because of what's been available. I could definitely relate to that in Israel. It's such a melting pot here, and we have the different people making aliyah from all different parts of the world, and then bringing their cuisines with them. To go back to your culinary tours and traveling around the world. So, what places have you taken groups to, and how do you think that influenced what you brought back to your kitchen at home and to your cookbooks?
So I started working for other people, like being like a guest on cruise ships, or as I said, like in Epcot, or doing being like a guest chef, like on a culinary tour to Provence, where I taught a couple of dishes. But that did give me entry into the kitchen, where I would then work with French chefs. So I didn't have an intense, week or two with them, but certainly enough to learn about herb de Provence, which is a beautiful spice blend that has lavender in it, that then I brought home and worked on a recipe for an herb de Provence chicken that I love, and actually just rediscovered after many years. I had forgotten about it. So then I started doing these tours on my own to Israel and to Italy, where I take a classroom in the Cordon Bleu in Florence and kosher it, and work for a week teaching authentic Italian food alongside Italian chefs. So those were really intense, like almost boot camps for me, both in the preparation that I needed to do. You don't just show up to Italy and say, here, I'm here ready to cook matzo balls. Like, I needed to show up with an A game of, really, I did like almost a year of research before starting the tours. I also do like Milan and Lake Como, and the northern part of Italy is completely different than the southern part of Italy, or the middle regions of Italy. So I feel like I run completely different tours based on where I am in that country. Israel, there's just, from one neighborhood to another, there's so much to explore and discover. So it's exciting to me. That's what really fires me up. And that's, I think, also been like the joy of this career, is I don't think I've ever had a bad day. I could probably say there have maybe been some hard or hectic days, but I've never had a bad day. I love everything about this job, and every place this job has taken me to, and the opportunities it has afforded me, and the people it's allowed me to meet. So that's kind of an interesting thing for kids to think about, that sometimes like your passions can take you to places that are so unbelievably rewarding and fun and exciting, and you get to do it even as a grown-up. So if you have a passion, whether it could be for anything, you never know where it could take you.
I love that lesson for kids, because it sounds like you didn't sign up for this job. One thing led to another and led to another, and now look where you are. You're so happy with your work, feeling so satisfied with your work, and this wasn't really your plan. It wasn't.
And anybody can learn anything. You did not hear me say that I went to culinary school or that I am a chef. I am not a chef, and I never took a professional class, let alone got a degree. Everything that I know how to do, I learned myself, or I asked for help, or I looked it up on YouTube. There is almost nothing out there in the world that you cannot learn how to do on your own, looking it up on, online, or asking for help, or saying to someone, like right now, I just got a pizza oven and I'm having a hard time. I have an amazing dough, but I'm having a hard time getting the dough off of the pizza peel into the wood burning oven. Well, I'm about to reach out to a local pizzeria guy to say, would you come to my house and work with me? Would you show me, how to do this? People are so happy to be helpful in something that they're an expert in, and kids should know that. One of the things that I really admired about my kids is when they were deciding on what to do for their livelihoods. They used to go to people in my community and say, I'll trade you a day of babysitting if you take me to work for a day, because I want to see what you do. And
Amazing.
men and women, my kids were doing like Tat Shabbat, in our shul. So they were exposed to all different kinds of people, men and women, who did all different kinds of jobs. And a whole bunch of them took my kids up on it and took them into the city or wherever it was that they were working and let them see what they did for a day. Because how do you really know what a grown up does based on their job title, you know? So you never know when you ask someone to show you something, how much you can get out of it.
Amazing lessons. So, to transition back to kids in the kitchen, what are some basic kitchen skills that you think every kid should learn?
Okay. The basic skill that you need to cook in a kitchen is you have to know how to read and not skip steps. Or have
Mm-hmm.
somebody read to you if you're really not a strong reader and maybe you're more of like an auditory learner. You need to follow instructions. So when a recipe says preheat your oven, you don't skip that. When a recipe says, well, the recipe won't say this, but every recipe should start with lay out all of your ingredients, pre-measure everything. If you've ever watched a cooking show, you see the chefs have everything. It's called mise en place, which is the French word for everything in its place. And I follow that. I have everything pre-measured in small little cups. If you don't want to do too much washing, you could use like paper muffin cups and have all your ingredients measured sitting out there. And this way, when it comes time to cook, the work is very fast. And it's also a way to double check yourself to make sure, like, oh, hey, did I forget the oregano? Oh, is it still sitting on my counter? Nope. That means it ended up in the mixture. Whereas if you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, first of all, you're going to be a much messier cook and you're not going to be welcome back into your kitchen very often if you leave a mess for your family. And I don't say that jokingly. Part of being a respectable cook is cleaning up your mess. Your family's going to be thrilled to welcome you in if you are a clean cook who then also, shares amazing food with your family and maybe takes even some of the cooking burden off the grown-ups in your family. But so I would say the first step before talking about any particular food is the technique of setting yourself up, getting down all your ingredients, pre-measuring everything, setting yourself up like you're on a TV set, ready to just dump, this in the bowl. It's your check that everything went in. And then making sure that you're reading and following. In the Kids in the Kitchen book in particular, I numbered the steps so that you can know I'm on step 1, I'm on step 2. In the adult books, I don't do that, but the instructions are very carefully laid out and, lines between each paragraph. So, and then from there, it's like, well, it is fun to make chocolate chip cookies, but that shouldn't be the only thing you go into your kitchen for. Try your hand at a soup. Try your hand at an appetizer or an after-school snack that actually is maybe even healthy, because as fun as chocolate chip cookies are, and believe me, they are delicious, that, you also want to be able to nourish yourself, feed your friends, feed your family, and you're going to want to do that on a more consistent basis than just an after-school snack every once in a while.
I expect by the end you have a whole menu ready, but starting with chocolate chip cookies is great. But I like what you said. We should expand. Don't only think we're making the dessert, only the potato kugel. We should try out all different things.
There's a recipe for steak fajitas that's in the Kids in the Kitchen book, and I'll never forget, one of the kids that was a recipe tester for me said he had sent me a thank you note afterwards because he was testing for me. I really owed him the thank you note. But he wrote, I was just celebrated by my family for the third night in a row when they requested my steak fajitas. Now, this kid tested a lot of recipes for me. He could have gone right to the desserts and made his family a chocolate cake, and they would have liked that. But he actually made dinner for his family as the first recipe that he went solo with. He was, I think, 10 years old at the time. So what an incredible sense of accomplishment. And he was able to do it because he stayed organized and he was able to read and he had all the ingredients and he was ready to go. If you're not ready to handle a knife, like maybe you're on the younger end, things like carrot muffins are, lovely, that not as much sugar as, let's say, a dessert serves as could be a breakfast, could be a snack, could be a side dish. Um, you know, Bean, rice, and cheese burritos. Like there's so many foods that don't require, knife skills. Although handling a knife is definitely a responsible part of working in the kitchen and a skill you need to learn, and finding a knife that feels right and comfortable in your hand and treating it with respect, never just like flying it around or throwing it into your sink of sudsy dishes where then you can't see it and don't know if you're about to pick up something sharp. You always want to make sure that you're safe. You take yourself seriously in the kitchen, I think would be my number one piece of advice. if you're in there, take yourself seriously and treat it as, something respectable, but something responsible.
Susie, thank you so much for giving us your time. You've taught us so many lessons about your own journey, about developing recipes and culinary tours around the world, but also about how we can bring that to our own life and bring our passion into our cooking. So thank you so much for coming on Reaching Higher.
So nice speaking with you.
Okay, kids, I need to talk more about that interview. I just learned so many new things from Susie. Susie, as you just learned, is a famous cookbook author. It was so nice of her to give us so much of her time on Reaching Higher and teach us so much. I can't believe that she wrote 9 cookbooks and she didn't even go to culinary school. Culinary means cooking. Many famous chefs and cookbook authors have a background in cooking, like they studied about it for years. As Susie just told us, she didn't go to school to learn this art. She learned it all on her own. The internet is such a powerful tool for us if we use it correctly. We can spend so much time learning a new skill by watching videos and asking others questions, like she told us about asking her local pizza guy about help with her new pizza oven. I love this lesson from Susie that with enough hard work, we can master skills on our own by being resourceful and learning from other people. Welcome to Joke Time. I'm here with Shalom and Yisrael, and they have some cooking-related jokes for you today.
Hey, Shalom, I have a joke for you. You want to hear? Okay. What did the knife say to the other knife?
I don't know.
Looking sharp.
Ha ha ha. I also have a joke.
Let's hear.
What kind of keys do kids like to carry?
I don't know.
Cookies.
So now what do we do with all of this information we just learned from Susie? I can't say that tomorrow I can write 9 cookbooks, and I can't say that by tomorrow I'll be studying Italian cuisine, Italian cooking methods, and teaching people how to hold a knife correctly. But there is something I can do, and there is something that each of you can do. I now have a challenge for each of you, and it's a big one. Take Susie's advice and cook something from start to finish, just like she said. Susie mentioned a really important part of cooking is reading. If you need help with that part, because some of our audience can't read yet, then grab your older brother, your older sister, your cousin, your friend, your mom, your dad. Pick a recipe that you want to make and do it. Lay out all the ingredients like Susie advised and measure them carefully. Follow the instructions on the recipe and serve it to your family and friends. And don't forget to send us a picture of what you made at reachinghigherpodcast@gmail.com. We can't wait to see what you create. I'd like to end off with a reminder for each of you. Maybe some of you have noticed our episodes come out every single Sunday morning. So when you get out of bed on Sunday morning, remember to ask your mom or your dad, whoever's with you, let me listen to Reaching Higher. I know there must be a new episode today. Share this episode with all of your family and friends so they can enjoy Reaching Higher too. We'll see you next week.